They found him where you would never expect to find a child, on the edge of a quiet Philadelphia neighborhood, in a patch of winter-bare woods that looked too small to hide anything. He was naked. Recently washed, some investigators would say, like someone had tried to erase the dirt of where he had been. His body was tucked inside a cardboard box that once promised a different kind of life, a bassinet box, meant for a baby's first nights. For 65 years, the boy had no name. Just a label that sounded like a nursery rhyme turned into a nightmare. The boy in the box. And then, in 2022, they finally said it aloud. Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Identity found. Killer unknown. And the most terrifying part is this. Once you know his name, you realize how close he always was. Close to streets, close to families, close to ordinary life. Close enough that somebody, somewhere, knew exactly who he was, and watched the world fail to find him. 1. A city that can swallow a child whole. Philadelphia in the 1950s is the kind of place Americans still romanticize in black and white: row homes, corner stores, parish schools, factory shifts, neighborhood policemen who know the names of the kids riding bikes in the street. But that nostalgia only works if you do not look too closely. Because in that same Philadelphia, post-war, booming, crowded, children slip through cracks that nobody wants to admit exist. Kids are born into complicated situations. Families split and recombine. Babies are taken in by relatives, handed off to neighbors, absorbed into the informal economy of favors and secrets. Some children end up in institutions that call themselves homes. And in 1957, there is no Amber Alert. No social media. No national missing kid database. There are milk cartons with nothing on them yet. There are newspapers, police blotters, word of mouth, and the assumption, sometimes lazy, sometimes cruel, that if a child goes missing, it is probably because somebody took off. The city can swallow a child. Not dramatically. Quietly. And when it does, the aftermath does not look like a Hollywood search party. It looks like a file folder that grows cold. 2. Fox Chase. The soft edge of the city. The place where Joseph was found sits near Fox Chase, in northeast Philadelphia, close enough to the city to belong to it, but with pockets that still feel like the suburbs are trying to happen. In the 1950s, this area is a blend: tidy homes and undeveloped lots, working-class families and stretches of land that have not yet been paved into certainty. Kids roam. People mind their business. If you see something odd, you tell yourself there is probably an explanation. And that is important, because the boy in the box case is, in many ways, a case about explanations. Not the ones police can prove. The ones communities tell themselves so they can sleep. A cardboard box in the woods? Maybe it is trash. Maybe it has dumped furniture. Maybe it is teenagers fooling around. Maybe it is none of your business. Until it is. 3. The boy before the box. What the public did not know for decades. For most of modern true crime history, the victim in this case was an absence, an outline drawn around missing details. The public knew. He was noticeably young, around preschool age. He was small, slight, easy to pick up, easy to carry. He had been dead a short time when discovered. He had been made anonymous by circumstance and by whoever left him there. But that was it. The rest became speculation. Foster care? Runaway? Orphan? Child of an abusive home? A kidnapping? An unwanted child hidden from neighbors? The lack of identity did something to people. It made the case feel almost mythic, like a ghost story with police reports attached. It also made the boy's suffering feel abstract. When you do not know someone's name, it is easier to turn them into a symbol instead of a person. And yet, people did care. Intensely. There were civilians who kept clippings for years. Cops who carried the case like a stone in their pocket. Amateur investigators who returned to it repeatedly were convinced there was one overlooked detail that would collapse the whole mystery. Because of the image, what little the public saw, what more investigators could not unsee, did not look like an accident. It looked like someone had done something deliberate, and then tried to disappear the evidence into a neighborhood that would not ask questions. 4. The era's quiet machinery, institutions, shame, and family business. To understand why Joseph remained unknown for so long, you must understand what privacy meant then. In the 1950s, families hid what shamed them: births outside of marriage, mental illness, addiction, abuse. Neighbors did not pry. Churches mediated. Social workers worked within limits. Police, unless forced, often treated domestic harm as family matters. There's also the era's institutional pipeline. If a child is unwanted, difficult, sick, or simply inconvenient, there are places that will take them. Those places are not always safe, not always well-regulated, and not always transparent. Even when intentions are good, systems can blur a child's identity into paperwork, handwritten forms, misspelled names, changes of custody that never become formal, children known by nicknames or middle names, kids who belong to someone but not in a way the world recognizes. So, when a child dies without a name, it is not always because no one knew. Sometimes it is because the knowledge stayed trapped inside a small circle of people who benefited from silence. 5. The community reaction: horror, then a strange kind of paralysis. When the case hit the news in 1957, it landed like a punch. A dead child is different from other crimes. It does not feel like a risk people can manage. It feels like a violation of the basic agreement we think we have with the world, that kids are supposed to be protected. There were calls to police. There were tips, sightings, rumors, confessions offered by unstable people looking for attention, psychics who claimed visions, parents who pulled their children closer. And then, the thing that often happens: the case became famous enough that everyone assumed someone else would solve it. Famous enough to be remembered, not solved. The boy was buried under a headstone that reflected the truth with brutal simplicity. A child known to the world only by what had been done to him. Years passed. The city changed. Fox Chase developed. The woods shrank. People moved away. Detectives retired. Witnesses died. And still, in true crime circles and in Philadelphia lore, the boy in the box remained a lingering wound, an American cold case that felt personal even to people who had never been to Pennsylvania. Because it asked a question you cannot shrug off. How does a little boy die, get put in a box, and nobody can even say who he is? 6. The investigators: the weight of an unnamed victim. Detectives who work child cases talk about something the public rarely hears: the emotional geometry of it. With adult victims, there is often a life story to reconstruct: jobs, relationships, enemies, patterns. With children, the story is shorter, but the urgency is higher. A child suggests an adult did this. A child suggests a power imbalance so absolutely it makes you sick. And in this case, the victim's lack of identity did not make the job easier. It made it worse. It turned the investigation into a hunt for a family that might not want to be found or might not even realize it should be looking. It forced detectives to ask uncomfortable questions. If he was missing, why wasn't he reported? If he was reported, why wasn't it connected? If someone knew, why didn't they come forward? And if no one knew, what does that say about the world he lived in? Investigators would later describe the way the boy's face stayed with them. The way the case file never truly closed, even when it was officially cold. Some of them had their own kids. Some of them could not talk about it at home without their voice changing. A named victim can be mourned. An unnamed one becomes a responsibility. 7. The modern turn: how science finally gave him his name. Here is where this story does something rare. It moves, decades later, from tragedy into a kind of delayed dignity. By the 2010s and early 2020s, a new investigative tool had matured into something powerful and controversial: forensic genetic genealogy. It is not a magic wand. It is patient, technical, and full of legal and ethical questions. But in the right case, it can do what old-school policing often cannot. It can rebuild identity from biological fragments and distant relatives. For the boy in the box, the effort involved re-examining preserved evidence with modern DNA methods, building genetic profiles, comparing them to genealogical records, and painstakingly constructing family trees backward through time: marriages, births, adoptions, name changes. This kind of work does not, Ping, a suspect like a TV database hit. The crime, discovery, scene, autopsy. It is late February 1957, Philadelphia winter that does not sparkle, just bites. The kind of cold that makes every sound feel sharper, dry leaves skittering, distant traffic, the brittle snap of twigs underfoot. Fox Chase is quiet out here. Not deep wilderness, more like the city's forgotten margin. A tangle of brush and bare trees behind tidy streets, the sort of place kids might cut through on the way home, the sort of place adults does not look at for too long. And that is why the box does not immediately register as anything more than trash. A cardboard carton, big, rectangular, the kind you would see behind a store or dumped on the side of a road when someone does not want to pay for disposal. A bassinet box, the kind meant to carry something that helps a baby sleep. Even before anyone knows what's inside, the irony is sickening. Because the box's original purpose is comfort, and what it holds now is the opposite. The moment of discovery. The first person who finds him is not looking for a child. He is doing something ordinary, checking the woods, moving through an area he has walked before. There is no dramatic soundtrack in real life. No warning. No cinematic cue that says, your entire day is about to split into before and after. He sees the box partly hidden in brush. It is damp, weathered, and positioned in a way that feels placed, not tossed, not accidental. Curiosity is human. So is dread, because some part of the mind recognizes when an object is too intentional. He steps closer, and then he sees skin. Not a doll. Not an animal. A child. For one suspended second, the brain does what it always does when it meets horror. It tries to explain it away. It tries to make it something else. Anything else. But there is no else that fits. This is a little boy, naked, pale against the dark wet earth, small enough that the box looks grotesquely oversized, like someone used whatever container they could find and did not care how it looked. He has not bundled the way you would expect if someone had tried to keep him warm. He has not dressed the way you would expect if a parent had lost him outdoors. He is arranged, and the arrangement carries a message. Not written, but communicated with brutal clarity. Someone brought him here. Someone left him here. And someone expected the woods to do the rest. The discoverer backs away, because getting closer does not help. Because there is nothing to fix. Because the moment you understand you are looking at a dead child, you understand you have stepped into a kind of story that ruins people. He goes for help. Calls are made. And the woods that were quiet a moment ago begin to fill with the sounds of an official world arriving. Engines, doors closing, footsteps that try to be steady. Police. Then more police. Then men who have seen bodies before, adult bodies, crime scene bodies, but still slow down when they realize the size of this one. Because a child changes the atmosphere. It changes how your stomach sits in you. It changes the temperature of the air. The scene, what investigators see. They approach carefully, scanning for anything, tracks, drag marks, tire impressions, discarded cloth, anything that suggests direction. The box is examined first because it is the one object that does not belong. Cardboard is soft evidence. It creases, tears, absorbs. It holds fingerprints poorly, and winter damp does not preserve much. But even without perfect forensic conditions, the box matters. It is a clue and a symbol. A product that came from somewhere. A store, a shipment, a purchase. A thing that lived a normal life before became part of something unforgivable. The boy's body is small and shocking still. He looks like he should be breathing, like the chest should rise if you wait long enough. But there is no waiting that brings him back. They note what they can do without disturbing anything. He appears noticeably young, preschool age. He is unclothed, exposed to cold that would punish even an adult body. His hair looks uneven, as if it has been cut recently, possibly by someone untrained or in haste. The skin has marks, bruises, abrasions, some that look newer, some that suggest a longer story. And that last part is the first time the case tilts from mysterious to deeply personal. Because a single injury might be an accident. But multiple injuries, different kinds, different ages, whisper about a life that was not safe long before the woods. Officers who are parents feel it immediately, a hard, protective rage that has nowhere to go. A desire to turn the entire city upside down until the person who did this is found. Others feel something quieter and just as dangerous, dread. Because if the boy can be left here like discarded cargo, it means the person responsible does not fear the system, or does not believe the system will connect the dots. Which raises a second thought, one that creeps in before anyone says it aloud. What if no one is even looking for him? The first, chilling contradiction. One of the most unsettling details investigators note early is this: the boy appears clean. Not clean, in the sense of cared for, clean in a way that suggests an attempt to remove residue. Dirt, blood, evidence, scent. It reads like someone tried to prepare him before leaving him. Not to honor him, because they left him naked in freezing brush, but to manage what could be traced back. It is the behavior of someone thinking ahead. Someone who had time, at least some time, after he died to decide what to do. That is a psychological clue as much as a physical one. Because panic dumping looks sloppy. It looks like the perpetrator is running. This looks controlled. And control suggests familiarity with the victim. Someone close enough to have handled him repeatedly, to have access to water, scissors, privacy. Someone who could keep him out of sight. Someone who likely did not need to abduct him. The body is removed, carefully, formally, painfully. Crime scene procedure kicks in, but procedure cannot cover the emotional reality of picking up a child who should be alive. There is a particular kind of silence among experienced responders at scenes like this. Less talk, fewer jokes, none of the casual bravado people use to shield themselves in adult homicide scenes. The boy's size strips the performance away. He is transported for autopsy. And with him goes the case's central fact. This is now a homicide investigation until proven otherwise. The autopsy, what the body tells them. If the discovery in the woods is the shock, the autopsy is the slow horror. Because a scene can be staged. A body, generally, cannot. The medical examiner documents what the public will later learn in fragments and headlines, but what investigators experience in a more clinical and more brutal form. The boy suffered multiple injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. There are bruises and abrasions on his body. Some marks appear to have occurred at different times, suggesting repeated harm rather than a single catastrophic event. There are indications he had not been thriving, signs consistent with neglect and malnourishment. The medical conclusions steer the case away from comforting narratives. This is not a child who wandered off and died from exposure. This is not a simple accident covered up by frightened parents. This looks like a child who was hurt, repeatedly, then killed, and then disposed of. And the most haunting part is what the autopsy cannot give them. A name. Because in 1957, investigators can document every measurable thing: height, weight, hair color, scars, dental characteristics, but those facts do not tell you where he lived, who tucked him in, who was supposed to protect him. They can estimate time of death, but they cannot estimate love. They can track injuries, but they cannot track the moment he realized no one was coming. And then there is the detail that becomes one of the case's most debated, most repeated, most psychologically loaded observations. His hair appears freshly cut. That detail alone triggers a dozen theories in detectives' heads. Was it done to make him harder to recognize? Was it done as punishment? Was it done because the perpetrator was trying to clean him up, to remove identifying traits, or to change his appearance? Was it done by someone who routinely controlled his body, his clothes, his grooming, his visibility? A haircut is intimate. It is domestic. It is the kind of thing you do at home. And that is the underlying terror. The crime feels like it came from inside a private space, not from the street. The first wave of public messaging. Does anyone recognize him? Police do what they can with the tools of the time. They distribute descriptions. They alert newspapers. They contact agencies and institutions. They check missing child reports and discover, impossibly, unbelievably, that nothing matches cleanly. No one has reported a boy missing who fits him exactly. That absence becomes its own clue and its own accusation. Because it suggests one of three possibilities, and none of them are good. 1. Someone reported him missing and it was mishandled or never connected. 2. Someone knew he was gone and deliberately stayed quiet. 3. No one in a position of authority felt responsible enough to report him at all. The community response is immediate and emotional. Strangers call in tips. People scan their neighborhoods, their schools, their churches, trying to remember a child who stopped appearing. Some of it is sincere. Some of it is guilt. Some of it is fear. And investigators are hit with a wave of something they will fight for decades in this case. Noise. So much noise. Because a dead child makes people see patterns in anything. It makes them report to neighbors they do not like. It makes them call in family secrets. It makes unstable people confess. It also makes real witnesses hesitate, because stepping forward means inviting police into your home, your marriage, your past. And if the truth is ugly enough, silence can start to look like survival. The city's collective nightmare begins. By the time the news spreads, the boy is no longer just a victim. He becomes a kind of symbol of danger, of family failure, of institutional failure, of a world where children can be harmed behind closed doors and the outside world does not hear a thing. Parents lock doors a little earlier. They watch strangers a little longer. Some people cannot stop thinking about how small a child must be to fit inside one. And that is how the case takes root in public consciousness. Not as a single crime, but as a question that will not stop repeating. Who was he? Who did this? And how did they think they would get away with it? Because leaving a child in a box does not just suggest murder. It suggests contempt. And contempt is what makes people believe a case like this might never be solved. Because contempt implies the killer did not see the boy as a person. They saw him as a problem to be removed. The investigation, clues, suspects, red herrings, breakthroughs. The first problem investigators face is not finding a killer. It is proving the boy existed in a way the world can recognize. Because in 1957, a homicide without a victim's name is like trying to solve an arson with no address. You can describe the damage. You can measure the heat. You can smell the smoke on everyone who comes near you. But you cannot walk back to the place where it started. 1. Who is he? The investigation begins with an empty file. At the precinct, the case turns into a command center built around absence. No missing person report that matches cleanly. No parent pounding on the front desk demanding answers. No school calling to say a student vanished. No doctor flagging a child who stopped coming in. Detectives do what they always do. They build the child from the outside in. They create a composite description, age range, height, weight, hair color, distinguishing marks. They contact hospitals, orphanages, group homes, juvenile agencies. They check church charities. They ask truancy officers. They send notices to neighboring jurisdictions. And tips start coming, fast, emotional, contradictory. Every caller has a maybe. I saw a boy like that at the market. There's a family down the street with a kid who hasn't been around. My cousin heard. This reminds me of. A dead child makes the entire city feel like a suspect. And that is not poetic. It is practical. Investigators are drowning in possibilities, and each one requires time they do not have. 2. The box. A clue that should be simple, and is not. The cardboard box becomes evidence because it is the only thing with a paper trail. It is a bassinet box, manufactured for a baby product, shipped to a store, sold to someone. Detectives try to trace it through distributors and retailers, leaning on invoices and shipment logs. This is the kind of work that looks boring in movies but breaks cases in real life. And they do find threads, retail origins, regional distribution, plausible purchase areas. But then the thread phrase where it matters most, the last hand that held the box. A box is easy to give away, easy to steal, easy to toss in a garage for months. Even if you trace it to a store, you still have hundreds, sometimes thousands, of possible buyers, and in the 1950s, nobody is swiping a card that leaves a clean digital record. The box tells police something important, though, even without a receipt. This was not a spur-of-the-moment disposal using whatever was nearby in the woods. This box likely came from a home, a basement, a trunk, the place where people keep household things. A domestic object. That is the first psychological contour of the case. Home-adjacent violence. Not the street. Not a stranger in an alley. A place where a child could be hurt repeatedly without anyone outside hearing. 3. The body as a document. Injuries, grooming, and the question of care. The autopsy findings. Injuries consistent with repeated harm, indications of neglect, push investigators toward a grim conclusion. If Joseph, they do not know his name yet, but we can say it now, had been living in a stable, watched environment, his condition would have raised alarms. Which means one of two things is likely true. 1. He was not in a system that had to account for him, school, pediatric care, public assistance with oversight, or 2. He was in such a system and it failed catastrophically. Detectives also fixate on the grooming detail, his hair appearing recently cut. It does not prove anything alone, but it changes the story. Because grooming is often associated with possession, this child is mine to manage. It is the kind of detail that makes experienced investigators think less about an opportunistic killer and more about a caretaker, or someone playing the role of caretaker. For the city is canvassed, then the case becomes a mirror. Police canvass neighborhoods. They knock on doors and ask the question that makes everyone uncomfortable. Do you recognize him? And here is the strange thing. Many people think they do. A child's face is easy to project onto. People want to help. People want the nightmare to end. People also want the story to be about someone else, some other neighborhood, some other family, some other kind of bad people. The community reaction fractures into competing emotions. Fear, could this happen to my kid? Suspicion, it must be someone like that. Guilt, did I see something and ignore it? Denial, not here. Not around us. In cases like this, community psychology becomes part of the evidence. Not because it solves the crime, but because it explains the silence that can surround it. A child can be missing in plain sight if enough adults agree not to look too closely. 5. Public identification attempts. Hope that turns into a kind of cruelty. In the early days, authorities lean on the public, posters, newspapers, outreach that, by modern standards, feel blunt and desperate. People come forward. They are brought in. Shown photographs. As to look. This is the part of true crime that rarely gets narrated, the emotional cost of identification attempts. For detectives, it is a grim routine. Each, maybe, comes with the hope that today is the day the boy becomes a person with a family and a history. And each no makes the case heavier. For civilians, it is worse. They go home carrying an image they never wanted in their heads, asking themselves why they could not recognize him, and what that says about them. And for the boy, it becomes a second violation, his face reduced to a tool. Necessary, but brutal. 6. The first big twist, no missing person mash. It is hard to convey how destabilizing this is to investigators. Because most child homicides orbit a missing child report. The report creates a timeline. It creates last seen information. It creates a list of associated adults. It creates urgency and accountability. Here, there is nothing. So, detectives start exploring the theories that only appear when the normal ones fail. Unreported birth/hidden child. A child kept out of view due to stigma, illegal adoption, family secrecy. Informal custody. A child taken in by someone not legally responsible. No paperwork, no official trail. Institutional movement. A child moved through homes or facilities under a name that does not match official records. Family choice. The darkest possibility. Someone decided not to report him because reporting would expose something worse. The investigation becomes less about who killed him and more about who had the power to make him disappear. That is a different kind of suspect list. It is not just violent people. It is also people who can convincingly play normally. 7. Confessions and attention seekers. The case attracts human static. As publicity grows, so does another inevitability, false confessions. Some come from mentally ill individuals. Some from people are seeking notoriety. Some from people who want leverage in unrelated trouble. Investigators must treat them all seriously, Because the one time you dismiss a confession, it might be the real one. But most do not hold up. Details do not match. Timelines collapse. Stories shift under pressure. The person cannot explain the box, the location, the injuries, the practical mechanics of disposing of a child without being seen. These confessions waste time, but they also teach investigators something valuable. Whoever did this likely was not a drifter looking for headlines. They were quiet, controlled, close enough to Joseph that the murder did not require a public confrontation. Red herrings that feel too good to ignore. Over the decades, the boy in the box case collects theories the way a shoreline collects debris. Some are plausible. Some are compelling. Some are outright wrong. A few categories keep resurfacing. A. The institutional theory. That Joseph came from an orphanage, a home, or a private facility, something poorly documented, possibly abusive, where a child could die and be quietly removed from the books. This theory persists because it explains the missing report. But investigators struggle to pin it down because records are incomplete, sealed, lost, or never existed in a usable form. B. The illegal adoption/baby market theory. In mid-century America, informal and illegal placements happened. A child could be acquired without the clean oversight we assume today. If Joseph was passed hand to hand in a gray market of custody, the paper trail could be intentionally thin. It is a theory that makes people uncomfortable because it implicates respectability, churches, social networks, helpful intermediaries, the kinds of people who do not look like villains. C. The local family theory. That Joseph lived nearby, within walking distance, in a home where nobody asked questions, or where questions were dangerous to ask. This theory is simple and terrifying because it suggests the killer did not need a plan beyond confidence that no one would connect him to the child. And again, the box feels domestic. 9. Them, lead. A story that fits too well, and cannot be proven, publicly. Decades after the crime, a woman comes forward with an account that, if true, would explain many of the case's strangest features. In various public retellings, she describes a childhood household where her mother allegedly obtained a boy, abused him, and after an incident, killed him, then washed him, cut his hair, and disposed of him in a box. The story has details that appear to align with known facts. That is what makes it so disruptive. Because investigators know this rule, the most dangerous lies are not random, they're built from real bricks. So, police evaluate such claims the way you would expect corroboration attempts, timeline checks, location verification, records, neighbors, anything. But the lead remains contested and, in public terms, unresolved, an unresolved, almost explanation that becomes part of the case's mythology. For the public, it reads like the answer that got away. For investigators, it is more complicated, a potentially significant statement that may or may not survive evidentiary standards, arriving decades late in a case already crowded with narratives. And psychologically, it does something else. It shifts the imagined perpetrator from faceless monster to someone's mother. Someone domestic. Someone who could pass in daylight. That possibility changes how the case feels in your chest. 10. The long freeze, when time becomes the killer's ally. As years turn into decades, the case does not just go cold, it changes form. Witnesses die. Memories warp. Neighborhoods redevelop. Records get destroyed by routine policy or lost through neglect. And detectives retire carrying the boy's face with them. Some cases fade because they are not solvable. This one stays because it feels like it should be solvable, because a child did not teleport into a box. Someone fed him at some point. Someone dressed him at some point. Someone had him in a room at some point. Which means the truth existed in reachable distance. It just was not reached. 11. The second big twist, exhumation and the gambling of DNA. In the late 1990s, authorities make a decision that signals how badly the case still matters. Joseph's body is exhumed for DNA testing. This is not a simple scene. It is not triumphant. It is a sober act that acknowledges two truths at once. The old investigative tools failed to name him. The future might. DNA, at that time, still is not the sleek crime TV miracle. The samples are limited. Degradation is real. Technology is improving, but not fast enough to guarantee anything. So they try. Because a name changes everything. A name opens doors, birth records, family trees, addresses, custody histories, medical care, school enrollment. A name turns unknown child into someone who belonged somewhere. 12. The modern breakthrough, forensic genetic genealogy. Years later, after more testing, more lab work, and the rise of forensic genealogy, investigators attempt something that would have sounded like science fiction in 1957. They build an identity from distant biological relatives. Not by matching Joseph to a criminal database, but by finding genetic cousins, people who share segments of DNA, and reconstructing a family tree backward until the only person who fits the profile is the child in the box. It is slow, technical work. Lab extraction, profile building, genealogists combing public records, births, marriages, name changes, sometimes discovering family secrets along the way. And then it happens. In December 2022, Philadelphia announces what the city has waited generations to hear. Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born January 13, 1953. A child with a name that anchors him to a real world. The announcement feels like a resolution. But in the investigation room, it lands like a starting gun. Because now detectives must do something harder than naming him. They must explain how Joseph's life led to that box, through real addresses, real adults, real decisions. And the name introduces a new complication: living relatives, privacy concerns, sealed records, family dynamics that can make cooperation fragile. Authorities withhold certain details publicly, which is sensible for an active investigation, but it also means the public is left with a new kind of frustration. We have his name. So why don't we have the killer? 13. The cliff edge, a name without a narrative. This is where the case becomes a modern thriller instead of a historical tragedy. Because identity is not a confession. It is a map. And maps do not tell you whether the destination is abandoned, guarded, or booby-trapped by decades of silence. Somebody, somewhere, intersected with Joseph's life in a way that can now be traced. Somebody knows where he lived, who watched him, who lost him, or who wanted him to go. And now the pressure shifts onto the living. Not an anonymous killer out there. A real person in a real chain of custody. A real circle of adults who once had a little boy in their orbit and then did not. Public, and how the case changed true crime history, ending with what we know, what we do not, and what might still break it open. Resolution: identity found, killer unknown. By the time Philadelphia held the 2022 press conference, the case had already lived through multiple endings. The ending where detectives ran out of leads in the late 50s. The ending where tips turned into rumor and rumor turned into folklore. The ending where the boy became a symbol, America's unknown child, and the symbol became, in a strange way, easier for the world to carry than the truth. But in December 2022, law enforcement did something that changed the temperature of the story. They said his name. Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Born January 13, 1953. And with that, the boy in the box stopped being a title. He became a person again. What identity means in a murder case. To the public, an ID sounds like the finish line. In investigative reality, it is the first solid step onto the track. A name unlocks doors that were sealed for decades. Birth records, and who signed them. Addresses linked to parents, relatives, guardians. Church/parish footprints, schools, doctors, social services. Family structure, marriages, separations, informal custody arrangements. The crucial question: who had Joseph, and when did they stop having him? The 2022 announcement created a new kind of suspense. Not who is he, but where was he hidden? Because kids do not become unreported missing by accident. That happens when adult systems, family systems, institutional systems, neighborhood systems decide a child can be overlooked. That is not just negligence. It is a social decision. 2. The post-2022 pressure cooker. A case reopens inside living families. Once Joseph was identified, investigators had to do something delicate and explosive: Walk into a real family tree and start asking questions that sound like accusations even when they are not. Who raised him? Who last saw him alive? Who had access to him in the days before he died? Who had a reason to keep him off the books? And here is the twist: most people do not anticipate. Naming Joseph does not automatically create witnesses. It can do the opposite, because now there are living relatives with privacy rights, family reputations, and old loyalties. The possibility that key individuals are dead, incapacitated, or protected by time. And a reality prosecutors fear: the truth may be known, yet unprovable. A homicide case does not get solved by what makes sense. It gets solved by what you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. 3. Why the killer can remain unknown even after the victim is known. This is where the case becomes a journalistic thriller in the most frustrating way. The ending exists, but it will not hold still long enough to film. 3 obstacles loom large. Time destroyed evidence. In 1957, crime scene processing was nowhere near modern standards, especially outdoors in winter. Fibers, fingerprints, biological traces. Much of that either was not collected, could not be preserved, or was not interpretable yet. B. The most likely suspects are often the closest adults. In child homicides involving repeated harm, investigators frequently focus on the people who had routine custody and privacy: caregivers, partners, household members, sometimes extended family, or informal guardians. But closeness creates a second problem. Those circles are also where silence is enforced. Not always by threats, sometimes by shame. Sometimes by fear of implicating oneself in neglect even if one did not commit murder. C. The law requires a clean narrative. Even if investigators strongly suspect what happened, abuse escalating to fatal violence, a cover-up, disposal, prosecutors need a definable perpetrator, dependable witnesses or confessions, corroborating physical evidence, a timeline that survives cross-examination. In a case that sat for 65 years, the truth can be emotionally obvious yet legally vaporous. 4. The case's darkest likelihood, a private crime with a public dump site. If you step back and look at what has always been consistent, it points to something psychologically chilling. The box is domestic. The body appeared cleaned, suggesting an attempt to manage what could be traced. The injuries suggested ongoing harm rather than a single catastrophic event. No immediate missing person report matched, suggesting either secrecy, instability, or deliberate concealment. This does not feel like a stranger snatch and kill. It feels like an adult who already had Joseph, already had access, and now of crisis, panic, or calculation, chose the woods over accountability. And the woods were not chosen at random. Fox Chase is close enough to reach quickly, remote enough to delay discovery, ordinary enough that a car stopping briefly does not trigger alarms. The site reads like someone who knew the area just well enough. A person blending into their own city. 5. The human fallout. Detectives, civilians, and a community that never stopped looking. For investigators, especially those who carried the case for years, the ID was both relief and grief. Relief, because the boy was no longer an unknown. Grief, because the name sharpened the tragedy. Joseph lived in Philadelphia, belonged to a real family network, and still ended up in that box. That implies not only a killer, but a surrounding failure. For the public, the announcement was a gut punch of a different kind. People wanted the name to be followed immediately by handcuffs. Instead, they got a reminder of how cold cases really work, not as arcs, but as knots. And for Joseph's living relatives, whoever they are and whatever they knew, the identification can land like an earthquake. Even innocent family members can suddenly find themselves interrogating their own past. Did someone hide him from us? Did we miss signs? Was there an adult we were taught not to question? Is the person responsible already gone, and did they die peacefully? This case does not just ask, who did it? It asks, how did everyone around it survive themselves afterward? 6. The ending we have so far. As of now, Joseph Augustus Zarelli has been identified. No killer has been officially named or charged. The investigation remains effectively open, and law enforcement has held back certain details, likely to protect the integrity of future prosecution and to avoid harming uninvolved relatives. So, the resolution is real, but incomplete. Joseph got his name back. But the person who put him in that box, whether through cruelty, panic, or both, has not been brought into the light. And that is why this story still works as a modern thriller. The final act is not history. It is pressure. Because somewhere in the chain of Joseph's life, there is a point where someone knows exactly what happened. Even if it is only as a family secret. Even if it is only as a memory they train themselves to swallow. The case is no longer asking the world, "Do you recognize him?" It is asking a smaller, more dangerous question. Who recognized him lastly?